It's like a player with a bow and arrow that never misses, and the consistency of a Roger Federer backhand. That's Toni Kroos. I took a little bit to talk about the retirement of Toni Kroos because I needed to kind of get my words together in order to do it properly or do him justice. Because to be honest with you, he deserves a great deal of justice when talking about him, because anything less would be basically unworthy. And I hope that the words that I give about Toni Kroos end up being exactly that. Like I said, a player that has that arrow, I mean, he just knows exactly where to put shots, knows where to put balls, barely ever missed passes. He was just this ultimate passing machine, just knew where to distribute, knew how to distribute, was always cool, was always calm, was always collected, was never the center of attention. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that that was his nature. And Toni Kroos just really offered you a bit of the sideshow. He kind of built this set. He made sure the lights were just right. He made sure that everything was in place. He made sure that everyone else was in position or needed to be in the right position. He was that general behind the scenes, that producer that makes sure that everything is well accommodated for the stars to be able to do their job, to do their stuff, to shine in all the light. Am I saying he's not a star? No, I'm not. I'm just saying that's the type of player he was. He never really took up the spotlight until he had to take up the spotlight. He was one of those players that, yes, could he take a shot from 35, 40, 40? Yes, he did, and he did it a lot of times when he was at Leverkusen. He did it a lot of times when he was at Bayern Munich, and he surely did it a lot at Real Madrid. So it's not a case of minimizing him. Don't take me as me doing that. That would be completely unfair. But let's keep it real when it comes to Toni Kroos. You see his passing percentage just in terms of career, and it's just amazing. And it wasn't just side to side. It wasn't backward. It wasn't just, the little safe 2 meter pass to it. No, it was the deep ball trying to cut in between defenses. It was trying to really see how he can carve the back line up. It was seeing how he could find the open man or the pass that would lead to the pass that would lead to the pass. And that's his genius. That was his brilliance. That was what made him such an interesting player in the middle of the pitch. Maybe you didn't study, and maybe there will be an argument in the next few years, and I hope it does, for the sake of it being a good conversation, not to try and make it more denatured and make it more denigrating, because if you're complimenting, the usual football talk that you've heard over years, the past few years, that complimenting one means insulting the other. No, 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 no. It's talking about how that pivot position between Toni Kroos and Sergio Busquets, you saw two different players doing it so elegantly in two different ways. It was Rembrandt on one end or Picasso on one end, and Van Gogh on the other one. Van Gogh on the other end, and two different styles that really hypnotized you, and they did something completely different, one next to the other, but they were still so compelling to watch. And maybe, just maybe, that saying that said, hey, if you're watching if you're watching the game, or what was it, if you're watching Busquets, you're watching the game. Well, if you were watching Kroos, you were watching how the game would be. You were watching basically him taking things into the future. Am I saying was he better than Busquets? No, I'm just saying he's different than Busquets. Maybe some will say, I don't care. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I think. What matters is what he was capable of doing, and doing it in such a calm and collected manner. At times it seemed he didn't sweat. He just was so cool, and he cruised. There was an article that was written by Sid Lowe, and he talked about how he was so smooth. It was just Roger Fett. He even quoted Juan Román Riquelme saying that Kroos looked like Roger Federer going from side to side in a tennis rally, and how he would go with his backhand. Everything just seemed so smooth. There was nothing troubled, and he did everything simple. Busquets maybe did the more spectacular with the turns and the pirouettes and this. Kroos did this, made the difficult look simple, and that really was what made people become in awe of him. On top of having a cannon for a leg, of course, some of the goals. I mean, you start looking at some of his goals and some of the goals that he scored, and the rocket shots that he had from 30, 45 out, maybe. Again, I'm not going to start delving into that specifically, but there's one that, of course, everyone remembers, probably one of the more memorable goals in German national team recent history. Of course, going to 2018 when they get eliminated in the first round, basically one of the only bright spots they had in that World Cup was that Toni Kroos goal in the end of the match that kept them alive against Sweden. And basically, outside of that, you have very sparse recollections of anything that was really positive in terms of Germany and their national team performances, maybe in Euro 2020. But outside of that, the only goals that you remember that just stick in your craw happens to be that Kroos goal against Sweden, right in the pretty much at the death in the World Cup in Russia. But Kroos, just an amazing midfielder. And again, there were a lot of times when Real Madrid were winning Champions Leagues that people didn't know exactly how it was being done, how they were pulling wins out of their asses, it seemed, as many would say. With Zinedine Zidane, they're saying, well, Zidane's not. But you know what? At times when you have those types of players in the middle, what do you tell a Toni Kroos to do differently? Honestly, there's certain players, there's really not much else you can tell them. What? Make sure you don't give it to the other team. Make sure you send them. I mean, he does that already. He's as close to automatic as you can get as a player. So I mean, I don't know what else we can do or say that's going to change that. But that's where we find ourselves, that yet another great one is retiring, that yet another master of the midfield is leaving, that he's doing it, look, and I don't blame him, because he basically said it, and it's something that was already anticipated, was, once I leave Madrid, I leave football. He already touched the pinnacle. He didn't need anything else. Mind you, we're talking about a guy that used the same boots for several years. That he didn't need brand new boots. Well, at a certain point he did, but he didn't need them all the time. He felt comfortable in his skin. He felt comfortable being the footballer that he was, and that ended up being maybe as unglamorous as you may look at it, but it ends up giving him that style, that grace, that amazing capability of knowing that every time Toni Kroos, every time Toni Kroos would have the ball, you felt secure. You felt as a player, you felt as a coach, and I would imagine that you as a Madrid fan would feel secure every time that ball would transit through Toni Kroos, that there was either going to be something big happening, or things would go about the same way, that everything would be very consistent. There weren't going to be any problems, and there usually weren't. It was very, very, very rare to see Toni Kroos make a mistake and make a huge mistake that would end up causing Real Madrid any problems in terms of a match or even a Champions League or even a La Liga race. So when it came to his consistency, there's really very little to talk about. He was just a player that defined he was one of those players that's defined a generation, and most likely it's a player that will define a generation that we may never see again in that position. And that ends up being probably the saddest thing. And I see a lot of people on social media talking about how sad a day it was when Toni Kroos announced his retirement. Well, we get to see him one more time. We'll get to see him a few more times. And yet, to be honest with you, I'd like to see a lot more times. And I'm talking about when Germany steps onto the pitch as the host nation in the Euros. Guys, it's been good. I hope and I wish that this is a good homage to such a phenomenal player, to such un crack. Just there's nothing else that I can say that can define Toni Kroos as a player. I hope that this was enough to do him justice. Okay, guys, Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon. Make sure you do the usual, and I hope that this was enjoyable to you. It surely was to me, and I hope and I wish the best to Toni Kroos going into the future. Ciao.